Welcome inside episode 594 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Piller, in the Blue Mountains. Ross Levitan still away on vacation, but he will join me in today's interview with Sports Illustrated and hockey news analyst Tony Ferrari, a recurring guest on the show. We're going to cover the 2022 NHL Draft. He talks a little bit about Gleb Trikazov, Brad Lambert, Ty Nelson, Joakim Kemell versus Jonathan Lekkerimaki. Lots of great stuff to get into with Tony Ferrari. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into today's episode of the Locked On Senators podcast. Here we go.
Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today is Tuesday, July 5th. Thank you for making the Locked On Senators podcast your first listen or watch of the day. We're available on all audio podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on YouTube. So if you'd like to watch us and you'd like to help us grow, please give us a like, quick thumbs up. Subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend about the Locked On Senators podcast, and leave a comment below on any of our videos. Now, guys, there's a lot of videos for you to leave comments under because we have done in our draft coverage playlist, we have 100 videos done covering this draft. We've been covering it very, very intensely as there hasn't been a whole lot of other news going around in Sens land, and we're still waiting to hear on more news. All these rumors of Claude Giroux going to Edmonton, Toronto, get out of here. He's coming home. Claude Giroux's coming home to Ottawa. Let's hope so anyways. July 13th, I believe, is when free agency opens up. So that'll be interesting to watch how that day goes, especially from the Giroux angle. But other than that, there hasn't been a whole lot of news on the Ottawa Senators front, which is really too bad. But we're going to keep pumping out more draft content. As I mentioned off the top of the show, our good friend Tony Ferrari from Sports Illustrated and Hockey News, heard of him, a couple really respected entities in the industry. And Tony Ferrari's been on our show a bunch of times. I think this is probably his 6th or 7th time. We love having Tony on the show, your favorite bald analyst, that's for sure. And we get into a lot of great topics about the 2022 NHL Draft. Tony has his own mock draft, his own rankings, so definitely go check those out. And you can catch up on everything he's been working on. And we have a lot of good things that we get into here. Tony talks about my guy, Ty Nelson. I was stoked that he ends up pointing out that could be a prospect that the Sens could be targeting in the second round. As you guys know, that's the defenseman that I think would be great for Ottawa in the second round. You get into some caution about Cutter Gauthier, which is good because, you know, we've been pumping him up a lot. He's been our pick in all of our mock drafts we've done for the Ottawa Senators. I think a lot of Sens fans like him and his style of play, but there are some reasons to be cautious. And there's also mostly Tony just kind of warns that there's players that he feels have better value at that range, which is totally fine. He gets into the debate. All right, if the Sens aren't available to take Cutter Gauthier like we kind of expect they will be if he's taken before 7th overall, maybe they're looking at Joakim Kemell or Jonathan Lekkerimaki. Who of those two does Tony like better? He gets into that whole debate and a whole lot more. So let's get into that interview. But before we do that, we got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. You got a protein power up with the best protein bar in the industry. It's Built Bar. Summer is here, and you're going to need some food to fuel all your outdoor activities. And Built Bar is the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. If you're going golfing, throw them in your golf bag. If you're heading out to work and need a little extra protein throughout the day, put it in your laptop case, whatever. They're so easy to bring along with you, and they can make sure your summer adventure is fueled up properly. What's the best part about Built Bar? Well, There's two best parts. They're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy it. Have you tried the Built Puffs yet? They have marshmallows that are protein infused, and they are delicious. Go to Built.com to check out all the cool flavors they have. They have a new summer flavor, which is very interesting to me. How about raspberry lemonade protein bar? Now, I know I just said all the bars are covered in 100% chocolate, but this might be the first one to go a little different, as it's covered in a delicious lemon coating with real raspberries in there. So check that out today at built.com. And if you're looking at getting some of those raspberry lemonade protein bars, use our promo code LOCK15 and you're going to get 15% off your next order. So guys, use our promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. It's Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. All right, guys, let's get to our interview with your favorite bald analyst from Sports Illustrated and the Hockey News. It's Tony Ferrari.
All right, we now welcome on a very good friend, Tony Ferrari. You can follow him on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari. He's a contributor to the Hockey News, and you can also go check out his top 100 draft rankings for the 2022 NHL Draft over at wingedwheelpodcast.com. Tony, first question, a top 100, that's biting off a big bite of the sandwich, the pizza, the pie, whatever you want to call it. How much effort goes into each list? I always like asking these people because it is such a year-long process, if not longer.
Yeah, it's I've been watching most of these guys for at least a couple of years, especially the top-end guys like Brad Lambert, Frank Nazar, the USNTP guy, Shane Wright, obviously, for a few years now. So you start to know these players pretty in and out. And by the time you get to December, you think you have a pretty good idea. And then there's guys that pop up like Marco Kasper, and you watch a guy like Simon Nemec all year and see him develop, and same with David Juracek when he gets back from injury and everything. So it's a long process, but it's a lot of video. It's a lot of watching these guys over a couple of years. And then it's just kind of understanding what you like and what you value and just being true to yourself.
Yeah, and we've been using your rankings as a reference for our own rankings, and we love looking at the different ranges that our seven entities use and where guys could end up on draft day. And what player would you say you're maybe higher on or highest on as opposed to kind of the rest of the general consensus?
Well, I was going to say Gleb Trikazov, but the fall of Frank Nazar seems criminal at this point. Gleb is a guy that I think is incredibly talented, incredibly skilled. There's so much to like there. His playmaking ability, his shot is one of the best in the draft, and he doesn't get credit for it. But he plays in the MHL, so I understand why some people don't have him as high, and I kind of get that. Whereas the fall of Frank Nazar, I don't understand it. This is a guy that outside of me and EP, I think he's not really in the top 10 anymore. And it's kind of coincided with the rise of Cutter Gauthier, which I don't quite understand, but it's there. And this kind of happens at the end of every draft season. It was like March, April, May, Nazar was in the top 10, Gauthier was around 20, and then things kind of flipped. And now I'm seeing Nazar at the end of the first round on a lot of lists. And if he goes at the end of the first round, whether it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Montreal Canadiens towards the end, a team like Tampa Bay or someone like that kind of gets him, this is going to be a really high-end player that someone's going to get and really kind of value and probably be one of the best prospects in their system.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, Tony, because on ours, and we mentioned we've got 7 different lists that we look at. And right now, we have one tie throughout the entire thing when we average them out. And it's Nazar and Gauthier, both tied with an average rank of 11. So I understand that. So let's stick with the NTDP and more importantly, Gauthier, because we just had Chris Peters on who just raved about Cutter Gauthier. And that's a lot of people are starting to give him the Jake Sanderson treatment of once they stop playing for the year, he just rises up all these lists. So what is it about Cutter Gauthier that maybe keeps you from being so high?
I think it's just looking at him compared to the other guys. Like a guy like Nazar specifically, he has all this upside. You see the flash and the flair and the ability to kind of be the game breaker in the game. And while I don't think Gauthier is a bad player, like I think I have him at 16 or 17 on my board. Like he's certainly a very good player. he's a guy that, like you said, after everyone stopped playing, all of a sudden he starts rising up the board. So I don't know whether he's doing an excellent interview or anything. Unfortunately, he was not a guy that I got to talk to a whole lot this year. But this is a guy that he plays a really projectable game. And I think a lot of times, especially in a draft like this, where we've seen 2 years of these guys, essentially their 2 most important years, be affected by the pandemic, and their development's kind of been up and down. A guy like Nazar, you look at and you're like, yeah, there's some risk there, because there is that bust factor if that controlled ball of chaos doesn't necessarily work out and figure it out. But at the same time, if that controlled ball of chaos works out, he's probably a top 2 or 3 player in this draft. So you look at that and you take the risk there. But with Gauthier, he's a guy that I think teams are kind of projecting at center, which I don't quite understand. He played a little bit there when Cooley was at the World Juniors. He filled in at times, but every time that the full team was there, he was back on the wing, and a guy like Nazar was down the middle. So I think he's a really fun player, really projectable player. He's got a really nice shot. I don't know exactly where the rise comes from, outside of maybe really good interviews, and at the end of the day, reviewing tape and everything. He's a good player. I don't disagree with that, but the top 10 might be a little rich for me.
And I mean, that's totally fair. I think sometimes fans of certain prospects, they get up in arms when someone says, oh, like I have him lower. It's not necessarily a knock on that player. It's just like, I see other guys with better value, better potential. And that's fine. It's all an opinion, and everybody has different ways they look at it. Now, one guy that you're very high on your list is Brad Lambert. And we talked to a lot of prospect scouts, analysts about him. And the thing is, you can see that pure skill, and you can see that when he is on, it looks like he's got the makings of a top 10 guy. But you don't always see that, and he's been playing over in the Pro League in Finland, so he hasn't quite been able to put it together. He had to move teams midway through the season. That raises some red flags. Where is the kind of divide between those moments of brilliance and the rest of Brad Lambert that maybe might have teams hesitating on taking a swing on him with a valuable pick?
I think the first thing is that the best team he played on this year was the World Junior team.
Yeah,
and that sounds completely unfair because he played on 2 pro teams outside of that. And like, wow, Yip Uveskala was good. They were fine. But they're still a bottom kind of tier team in the Liga this year. And at the end of the day, I watched so many games with him where he was on the first line to start, and then he'd be on the third line, then he's taking shifts with the fourth line, then he plays a shift or 2 with the second line, and he's back on the third line, but with 2 different line mates. And it's like, what is going on here? Like, there was no stability on the roster. There was no stability in it was basically Jeff Blashill just line mashing all night long at times. It was pretty unreal to see at times. And then at the end of the day, you're like, oh, he played 11 minutes. And it's like, well, how is this guy supposed to get comfortable playing 11 minutes? And the guy that I compared him to, at least not stylistically, but at least situationally, is Lucas Raymond in his draft year. And we've all seen how good he turned out this year with the Red Wings and everything. So while I don't think they play the same style of game, they were in kind of a similar situation. So I think that's kind of a thing to look at there. And then when he went to the Pelicans, like, that was a team that was playing minor league hockey. Basically, it was there were times where they try the flying V. There were times where they try to break it. And
I mean, they are the Pelicans. The flying V makes sense.
I wish I was kidding, but like, there were times where, like, they tried to, great logo, terrible breakout. They tried to break out 5 men across the ice. Like, what are they doing? It was frustrating to watch. There'd be so many times where he'd be kind of cutting across the middle in the neutral zone, using his speed, using his skill, and then the pass would just get absolutely dumped in behind him, like dumped down the ice for an icing call. There were a couple of times this year where he set up a guy around the back door, especially with the Pelicans, and it would just go off the guy's stick. Like, the dude could have stopped the puck, had a drink of tea, and then put it in the net, and he didn't have the ability to even do that. So when you saw him at the World Juniors and he was able to take over the game there, and despite it only being 2 games, I think that's where you're seeing the real value of this guy. And obviously small samples and blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm never the guy that's like going to tell someone to listen to a small sample. If anything, I'm telling you to disregard a tournament completely. But with a guy like Brad Lambert,
two of your favorites, though.
Yeah, 2 of my
just
boys.
Put them together.
Yep.
I'd love it. But that's just it. I think a guy like Brad Lambert, if you put him in a situation like the NTDP, he's Frank Nazar, and that's where you're getting the value where. But with the situation he was in and everything, I think it's going to be fun to watch him at the World Juniors this summer when he is already drafted, goes 42nd like Craig Button thinks he might, and then he looks like one of the best players at the tournament.
So if you're the general manager that picks him, is he playing in Saskatoon next year? The team that has his rights in the WHL? Great question, Pilsy.
No, he's playing in the AHL.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he's a European player. He doesn't have a contract for next year as far as I know. You can put him in Saskatoon if you want, just to keep him with the junior level. But at the end of the day, I think this is a guy that can play with the pro level. Treat him like William Nylander, treat him like Philip Zadina, like Moritz Seider after his draft year. They all played in the AHL. And you look at a guy like this and you put him in the AHL. He's played against pros for at least 2.5 years now. Yeah. He's used to playing with the physicality and everything. And this year it was obviously a down year for him production-wise. But you put them with guys that have some level of skill, and you get your hands on them developmentally. And the other thing with the AHL is, like I said, you have that hands-on experience. You're able to kind of dictate what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's a really important thing for Brad Lambert.
And one thing, sorry, Ross, just before we go on, I'm glad you mentioned that about Lambert, because Ross, remember when we talked about him? But the one thing I kept seeing is like this guy just keeps trying to do things on his own. Like he will not use his teammates. And then next,
because you and I are his wingers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like I was so frustrated watching highlights of him, being like, why doesn't he make that simple pass to his centerman trailing behind? Well, it makes sense. If he knows it's just going to lead to a turnover or it's not going to work, he's probably going to try to do it himself. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that kind of shed some light on why he was playing such a certain style over there, at least from what I saw.
Yeah, and we saw this, even Sens fans talking about a guy coming over from Liga. I think obviously the much higher ceiling on Brad Lambert, but what Roby Jarventi did, came over, and it took him a little while to get going, but ultimately had 33 points in 70 games, and now he's getting used to the smaller ice. And in Tony's case, what he's mentioning about Brad Lambert is getting to play with better teammates, which can certainly help. One thing I meant to ask you earlier, and you kind of hinted at it with the wide range of guys here in the mid-tier, but what's the strength level of this draft overall, in your opinion, versus, let's say, the last 3-4 years?
Undecided. And that sounds like a cop-out answer, I think. But like I kind of mentioned earlier, this draft class has been so affected by the pandemic. A guy like Shane Wright didn't play at all last year. And then the year before, his season was interrupted. And then he didn't get that summer of development that he normally would get. So many of these guys are just kind of up and down developmentally. Even the guys that got to play, their practices were with 5 other guys for a whole year and stuff like that. And then their summers were completely eliminated because they couldn't get ice. So they couldn't get training facilities. They couldn't be in the gym. There's so many little things like that normal draft years get over the last few years that this draft year didn't get. So I think at the age 16, 17, 18, these guys were affected more than anybody. And now we're kind of seeing that with some inconsistent draft years, and especially with certain guys in this draft class.
Yeah, and another guy I want to ask you about, and someone that's kind of in the Sens range at number 7, is Matthew Savoy. Like this, talk about an undersized player, but he has all those offensive attributes you want to see. Good skating, great shot. He's also a good playmaker as well. I mean, he put up a bunch of points, 90 points in the WHL. Do you think he's someone that could make sense for the Sens at 7th?
Yeah, if the Sens decide to draft a small player, this is probably the guy that they go with, because he's got the incredible skill. He's got the ability to score. He's got the ability to be a playmaker, and he's absolutely cerebral. He's one of these guys that you can kind of see the switch click sometimes when he gets pissed off or when he gets angry or when he sees that he needs to make a play, and then he'll just walk anybody. Like you saw it at the Top Prospects game. You saw him with the Winnipeg Ice, where he would just go, okay, I'm the best player on the ice right now. I don't care if Shane Wright's on my line. I don't care. Like, I will go and I'll be the best player on the ice, the most dynamic player on the ice, and he has that ability to do that. So I think this is a guy that, is he Braden Point? Maybe not. Braden Point's obviously an elite NHL player, but if you're getting B+ Braden Point here, a guy that can play center at a smaller level, in worst case scenario, he ends up being a really dynamic top line winger.
Yep.
I don't think you're really complaining too much about this guy.
Oh, you're on mute, Ross.
Nice. What a pro. What a pro. Just a couple more for you, Tony. Really appreciate your time. As always, go follow him on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari. You can find his work in the Hockey News. One of my favorite things to watch is Game Tape with Tony, again, at the Hockey News. All these prospects in a very casual environment, but also picking their brain, watching their clips over again. So definitely recommend going to check that out at the Hockey News. Now, you mentioned some picks, some available talent at number 7 for the Ottawa Senators. If I gave you the list of Cutter Gauthier, which I don't think you're going to choose based on our conversation already, but let's say the other 2 shooters who we haven't spoken about, because we did talk about Nazar, Savoy. Let's put these 2 head to head. Jonathan Lekkerimaki and Joakim Kemell. Who would you take out of those 2 guys and why?
That's a tough one. I think I probably lean Kemell because I think the upside is a little bit higher with him. He's an active forechecker. When he gets engaged and he gets motivated, he can be a really good defensive player too. He brings a bit of a physical element to the game. I've seen him hip check guys. I've seen him throw a big hit in the open ice. He has that ability. It's a little inconsistent, but he has that. And then he has the unreal shooting ability. I think at the start of the year, he had a 33% shooting percentage, if I'm not mistaken, and that's when he was leading the Liga in scoring. Then he had an injury, and his scoring fell off in the second half of the year. But I think he's somewhere in the middle of what we kind of saw. I think he could be a 17% shooter at the NHL level if his kind of game works out. Whereas Lekkerimaki, I think, is like a B-plus version of him. I think there's a lot of things that he does. He's an active forechecker as well. He doesn't bring the physical element to the game. I think he thrives a little bit more on the power play. But I think both guys are realistically good options at number 7. Anywhere between 7 and 15, I think both those guys could go.
Well, because you mentioned with Brad Lambert maybe not having the best teammates. Well, for a part of the season, they were on the same team with JYP.
And that was the craziest thing about it, is because Brad Lambert was getting dumped all over the lineup. Joakim Kemell was like, here's Turkalainen, play with him all season long. We're not going to move you once. Like, we're going to put you with the best player on our team. Thrive. And Turkalainen drove play a lot of the times and did a lot of things that Brad Lambert wishes he had on his line. And Joakim Kemell kind of really benefited from that. And I think that was one of the most confusing situations in this entire draft class, because with Kemell, they were like, here's a guy, stick with him. With Brad Lambert, they're like, here's everyone. You might as well play on a line with 2 defensemen. Who knows?
Yeah, geez. I mean, every time we cover prospects overseas, I'm always baffled at the differences in development and coaching decisions that they have.
Danila Yurov, of course.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we won't even get into that. So
we've
covered
a whole other episode.
Yeah, I don't want to get angry again. We've covered a lot of options for the 7th overall pick. The Sens' next selection is at number 39. Now, I've got a couple guys I'm targeting here. As I've kind of prefaced this question to other people, let's go with the assumption that the Sens take a forward at 7th. So probably maybe looking at a defenseman at pick 39. Who are some guys you have in their range? And I'm looking at your rankings right now, and there's a guy that I love that is right in that target area.
There's a lot of guys in that range, because I think a lot of the guys in my mid to late 20s that are defensemen, whether it's a guy like Sam Rinzel, a guy like Owen Pickering, could be there. But I think the guy that I'd probably go with is maybe Ty Nelson.
That's my guy. Yes.
Little undersized guy. I think he was limited a little bit by the system he played with in North Bay. Yeah. He has all this offensive potential. You see flashes of just absolute game-breaking ability, the ability to just look at a defender on the other team and absolutely walk him, and then has a bomb of a shot. So there's a ton of potential here. And his defensive game gets crapped on a little bit too much, I think. He's a guy that is more than willing to engage physically. Like, I've seen this guy in person multiple times, and dude's jacked. Like, for being a 5'8" defender.
That's the thing. He's almost 200 pounds. It's insane.
He's got the strength. He's got the skating ability. He's got the offensive dynamism. I think he needs to work on his positioning a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think this is a guy that is probably going to get drafted in the 2nd round because he's 5'8", but he plays like he's 6 feet. So I don't know. I think this is a guy that probably has some pretty solid value in the 2nd round.
I love that you went with Pillsy's guy. That's so awesome. All right, Tony, final question. Since we're talking about a right shot defenseman like Ty Nelson, we often see on these lists Jiricek and Nemec 1-2, like in their order together, not 1-2 on the entire board. Yeah. You've got a bit of a gap here. What gives Jiricek that much leeway to be number 3 on your list versus Nemec down at 8?
I think Nemec is a guy that has a lot of potential, but he's yet to kind of show it. And I think that sounds a little bit mean because he's done so much at the Slovak League, but the Slovak League is not very good. The Czech League is better than that. And at the end of the day, I think with what Jiricek does, he plays a bit more of a projectable game, but there's also so much more offensive upside. He's got the cerebral nature to his game, whereas Nemec is a little bit more of I'm going to push the puck around. I think the big thing I noticed with him in transition is he likes to shovel the puck up the ice, a little bit like Morgan Riley does, where he's kind of pushing the puck a few feet and skating onto it, whereas a guy like Jiricek, when he's pushing the puck up the ice or skating up the ice, he's stick handling. He's using the puck on his stick to manipulate defenders. He's not just using the space that he can find. So I think that's kind of one of the things. And I think at the end of the day, I think Nemec needs to kind of develop a little bit more an aggressive tone, a killer instinct, because it sounds weird to say with all the offensive numbers he put up, and especially with the playoffs he had, I think it showed a little bit more. But Jiricek is a guy that will go into the offensive zone, whether it's on the power play or at 5-on-5, and want to be the difference maker, want to be the guy that makes a play. Whereas a guy like Nemec is like seemingly off-putting himself to the other team and kind of just letting his teammates make the play and letting kind of things happen around him rather than being the guy that's doing it.
Super interesting. And we talked about wanting a forward for the Sens, but if Nemec is on the board here, I changed my opinion. He would be a great pick as a right shot D for the Ottawa Senators. Tony, we look forward to continuing watching your coverage along with the hockey news and at Winging It in Motown. And boots on the ground, you're going to be in Montreal, so we'll be following along at the Tony Ferrari on Twitter. Always appreciate you joining us, man. We'll do it again soon.
Yeah, sounds good, boys.
Thanks to Tony Ferrari for joining us. A busy time for a guy like Tony. So for him to not only give us time for an interview on today's show, we get into some great topics as you just heard, but also he's one of the analysts on our mock draft video, our YouTube exclusive video. So we can't thank Tony enough for taking the time to do that. And guys, we got to let you know this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's so hard for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer? Something that you can do. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket on your mobile device. Save time and money while using rockauto.com. Why would you spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or your car dealership when you can do it yourself? rockauto.com prices are reliably low for every single customer. They've been doing it for over 20 years. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solutions for all your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now, and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right? Locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. It's rockauto.com. All right, guys. Well, like I mentioned off the top, we're still kind of waiting for some more Ottawa Senators news. While Ross is away, it'd be nice if Pierre Dorion could throw me a bone or two so I could have something to chat about, but there hasn't been too much. We've got some new assistant general managers. There's been Claude Giroux rumors. The draft is 2 days away, so we're focusing on the draft. As you guys have noticed, if you've been following along while Ross has been away, we've had great interviews throughout this time. Chris Peters, David St. Louis, Tony Ferrari, Corey Pronman, Scott Wheeler. There's so many great guests that have joined us to kind of help fill this time and help you get ready for the 2022 NHL Draft. I am fired up about this. If you guys still haven't watched our mock draft, some of those names I just mentioned are on that YouTube exclusive video, almost 4 hours long, almost 18,000 views. We cannot thank you guys enough for helping us get to that point. This has been monumental for us, and we're stoked to do this every year going forward. We have 64 prospect profiles. We did our rankings all the way down from 64 to number 1. We used 7 different scouting entities to make our average list. We used Craig Button, Bob McKenzie, Chris Peters, Tony Ferrari, Corey Pronman, Scott Wheeler, and I'm missing one. I forget what the last one is, but that's 6 of the 7. And we made our own list based off those, and we ranked our top 64, and we go in depth about each prospect. Most of the time we do about 8 to 15 minutes on each prospect, so you get a good view of what these guys are all about and what we think about them, and if we think they could be a fit with the Ottawa Senators in this upcoming draft. Thank you guys for following along with the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Brandon Piller for Ross Levitan away on vacation. This has been the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.